And welcome. I'm Bill English. We are now live here at the Bible in Business. And I just want to say good morning. I'm the publisher here at Bible in Business. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, let me invite you to take just a couple of minutes later this weekend to check out my website at bibleinbusiness.com. I have over 150 posts and over 200 podcasts to help you better integrate your Christian faith into your role as a business owner. Bible in Business and my ministry exists to help Christians who own businesses understand and realize and live out their stewardship role before the Lord. I'm not trying to build a big ministry. I was on the phone with a guy here in the Twin Cities this week who is trying to build these labs and these incubators to help Christians start and run businesses and to have transformational impact in the marketplace for the Lord. I told him that my role is that I write the content. I do the interviews. This is what I do. I write the content that he's going to use as he works with his entrepreneurs and helps them start their businesses. So this episode with Scott Ward is part of my series titled Profiles in Stewardship. These interviews are intended to illustrate what Christian stewardship looks like in the real world for Christians who own businesses. So, when I have the opportunity, I talk with other Christian business owners about how they integrate their role as a business owner into their Christian faith. Profiles in Stewardship, these interviews are unscripted, they are broadcast live while we're recording them. They are real and they are unedited. I don't go back and re-edit these if we make mistakes or say something bad. So we only take one of these interviews and we do one take, and that's a profile in stewardship. Now, many of the topics I discuss in this series are also discussed in my book titled A Christian Theology of Business Ownership. And what you'll find, let me just see if I can make that bigger here. And I need to get rid of this. What you will find is that Christian Theology of Business Ownership is a book that covers a wide range of topics about how Christians who own businesses can be better stewards with the business that God has given to them. So I would invite you to go out to Amazon and grab a copy of that book. Or if you want the abridged version, you can grab the middle book here, What the Bible Says About Owning a Business. That's the abridged version. It's about 150 pages, whereas the theology book's about 350 pages. And of course, I've also written another one called Biblical Wisdom for Business Leaders, 30 Sayings from Proverbs. I invite you to go take a look at those at Amazon.com. So today we are talking with Scott Ward, who's the president and owner of Forward Associates. Scott describes himself as a treasure hunter of scriptural and business paradigms. He's worked as a senior consultant at Vision One High Performance Group and continues to work as a regional board member for Hope International, a microfinance ministry serving in a number of countries around the world. Scott founded and then sold Forward Steel, which was a stainless steel manufacturing company serving a niche market in the hospitality industry. He's a graduate of Carleton College and has completed master's coursework both at Babson College and Bethel University. Currently, Scott mentors business owners here and abroad, and he says that even though he's been a follower of Christ for several decades, he is still discovering applicable truths from God and his word, as well as learning how to better love and cherish his bride of nearly 4 decades. Scott is also the author of a new series that he has titled Monday Morning. And he has 2 books out right now, both from the Sermon on the Mount, volumes 1 and 2, Jesus on Monday Morning, volumes 1 and 2 about the Sermon on the Mount. And Scott, in just a moment, we'll let you. Well, in fact, why don't you just chime in now and tell us about this series and what you hope to do with your book writing here?
Yeah, this series came about out of a discussion group with pastors who were trying to figure out some new ways to encourage people to bring a faith to work. And one of the things I pointed out to them is you've got to understand that 80 to 90% of people don't want to be at that particular job. And so as I was thinking about that, it's like, well, what can the church do about that? And then realize that Jesus worked, and Jesus was tempted with all the different frustrations and all kinds of things that we deal with at work. And I just came to, he brought to mind the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the poor in spirit. When we're burned out and stressed and everything else, that's when we can kind of see when we get a chance to inherit the kingdom. And so it just kind of led from there. Hopefully these are guides. These are meant to be discussion guides, so it's not just my talking to them about my perspective, but the groups will get together and share their own learned experiences and how the Spirit is giving them wisdom to survive and thrive at work.
Okay. Well, good. So you can get copies of these books, and if they're study guides, I'm assuming that they would be used by groups. So maybe if you have 5, 6, 8, 10 business owners meeting at the same time, you can use Scott's study guides to help guide some of your discussions. So, Scott, thanks for writing those. I look forward to more from you, and look forward to your continued ministry and how it is growing. So you can pick those up at Amazon. Uh, and they're in both. Are they in both digital and paper, or just paper format?
They're in both, and they're
They're
also
in
available
both.
on iTunes and several other places too. And so,
Okay. Beautiful. All right. So during this broadcast, if you'd like to interact with us, you can do so just by typing in a message. We're live streaming on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and a couple of other platforms. So feel free to just use the chat versions of whatever platform you're watching, and interact with us that way if you'd like. We also recognize that we've been having some problems with Scott's audio today, and so like I said, live and unscripted, it's real world. So we're just gonna head forward. And Scott, I'm so appreciative, just really appreciate you coming and being with us this morning. Let's start. This is where I usually like to start with my guests. What scriptures are most meaningful to you when it comes to integrating your faith in your role as a business owner?
yeah, the primary one that I try to keep forefront is Galatians, in Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I may have missed one in there, but particularly love, joy, peace, and particularly as the stresses of work, the stresses of business ownership fit in there. How do I maintain love? How do I maintain love for a poor performer? How do I maintain love for the rest of the team? How do I maintain joy and peace in the midst of the money's just not there for payroll this week, maybe? And so how do I keep that? Particularly as Jesus says, "Do not worry or be anxious. You know, your Father in heaven knows what you need." And I'm like, I need payroll this week, so help me out here, Lord. Um, and and so just really trying to make that a part of it. And there's many other verses, but those are the one. That's the one that just I just say, okay, am I? Do I have His love? Do I have His joy? Do I have His peace? And can I extend that to others around me in the midst of business?
It's kind of like when we do turnarounds, Scott, at Platinum Group. That's where I'm a partner. We call it being in the eye of the hurricane. So the guy who's asked to go in and run the business on a daily basis, he's supposed to be in the eye of the hurricane, and all the other partners or people on the engagement are supposed to manage the swirl around him. So it's interesting. You mentioned meeting payroll. Sometimes there are business owners who just, they wake up in a panic, at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday night or Thursday morning, because they got payroll on Friday and they don't have enough money to meet it. That's a really difficult place to be. When you talk with business owners and they're in that situation, what are some things that you tell them?
Oh, well, I don't have particular answers. I just say, hey, we have to trust, we have to rest in the Lord that this is what it is, and maybe just ask for wisdom and guidance in terms of what are some maybe there's other options that we hadn't really thought about in terms of drawing that in. Is there a customer that could pay early? Is there, whatever? Is there another source of cash that could
Hmm.
come in temporarily? It's there's a lot, but there are I don't know. God never promises a calm storm, or all calm seas all the time. Um, I know when Forward Steel was struggling a little bit for a period of time. I heard a pastor go through a series of sermons, but one of the things he was talking about Paul's shipwreck, and
Yeah.
Paul just kept saying, "Okay, none of us will die. That's the promise. The ship may
Yeah.
not make it, but none of us will die." And then they crash on the sandbar, and then one of the Roman soldiers say, "Okay, swim or grab a plank." So it's like you're not helicoptered to the beach. There is some effort, and you've got to do some work here. But yeah, no one's going to die, but the ship may not make it, and that may be true for some of our companies too.
Hmm.
I
Yeah. Yeah, one of my and I know we're kind of off topic here from our show notes, but one of my uh, sayings that I use, undeniable truths, as I was trying to think of, is that success never endures, but failure is not need not be fatal,
right,
right? So I have yet to meet an entrepreneur who's highly successful who hasn't been knocked down 5 to 10 times. And I'm kind of fond of saying that the only difference between an entrepreneur who succeeded, right, and an entrepreneur who eventually didn't really do well is that the one who succeeded just kept getting up. He got up one more time,
right.
right? And I know that you and I both see that. Well, let's kind of move into your sweet spot here a little bit. Talking with Scott Ward of Forward Associates. He is a business consultant and a business coach. And you do coach Christian business owners, Scott.
Hmm.
So, talk to me about how you do that and what are some of the common development concerns that you see Christian business owners have?
Yeah, I think some of the common things are that we have a tendency to fall back into what I might call business traditions, business habits,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that maybe we learned in school, or the things we've learned in the early parts of our career, whatever it is. I mean, we say, "Oh, this is the way," or our own personal personality habits too. "Oh, this is the way I always respond to this situation," or "this is the way I've been taught to respond to a situation or a circumstance." And so it's like, hey, we need to like stop, take a breath, figure out, is this really what we're being called to do? Like um, one of the examples is like, um, we were at one company where I was a minority owner, and we'd hit the 2001 recession, and our natural habit is, well, we could lay off people,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 we're like, well, that's not really what we want to do, or that's not necessarily what we have to do. So through talking in an executive team, we came up with this scheme where we reduced hours, everybody's hours, to 32 in a week. But we said, if you go volunteer to help at a nonprofit like the food shelf or the schools or whatever, um, we will pay you up to 4 hours each week.
Hmm.
And all you have to do is bring back a slip from that organization saying you were there for 4 hours, and we'll add it to your paycheck. Well, we came up with probably 10 to 15 different reasons why we thought this was a great deal to offer for volunteering. First of all, we get to retain the talent, and we didn't have to worry about replacing them. We were doing at least a little bit to maintain the financial security of the families, the households we felt responsible for, and we were doing something good for the community. And we got some publicity for it, but the thing that really warmed is one of our assemblers told me what she said. "I went and volunteered to read in my kid's classroom, And I just loved it so much that even when we come back full time, I'm going to keep volunteering at the
Good
school.
for her.
Yeah. And I was like, that's
Good
awesome.
for her.
Yeah. Now we only had like about a third of our employees actually take advantage of it. And I've talked to a few that weren't doing any of this, and they were like, "Hey, even at 32 hours, I'm okay. I can pay my bills and stuff like that." But they were like, "We just think this is awesome that you guys are doing this." In the 2008 recession, we fell back on that kind of that model, but we bumped it up from 4 hours to 8 hours, so we could complete everyone's 40-hour paycheck each week.
Hmm.
I mean, we tried doing some things in house, hoping we could manage through it, but there's only so many times you can paint a wall or clean, mop a floor, that kind of a thing
Right.
to keep people busy.
Right.
And they were getting frustrated in terms of getting paid to do something that they didn't feel like was contributing to the success of the organization. So they were like, "Hey, we really want to do something here that's helping make profits, not just collect our paycheck." So that was one of the great cultural things that I appreciated about the team that was there.
So yeah, purpose in work is really important. That if without purpose, you really don't have dignity in work. But if people can tie what they're doing to both purpose in their job and then the larger purpose of the organization, that's one of the elements that helps you get to a place where you have a strong team, right?
Yeah, yeah, and we said every job was honorable. Um,
Hmm.
that when we landed a big customer account or something else happened, we made sure that we congratulated everyone for contributing to
Hmm.
that, even the people who just cleaned the place. We're like, hey, because when customers come to visit, we present ourselves well when it's maintained and it's cleaned. Um, that effort that we did in terms of the layoff got us a Minnesota Business Ethics Award, I think, for innovation. I don't know that we got another one, but for innovation. And so we then celebrated that by giving everyone $50 or something like that. But but the whole company, and we had 90 to 100 employees. We brought them all into our meeting place, and we said, "Okay, I want everyone to raise your hand. Okay, and then I solemnly swear not to spend what I'm about to receive on myself, but on my family or other friends, or
Sure.
and
Sure.
and then we went around and we handed them, you know, the money, and they were like, "What? Wow!" And we said, "Hey, we can only do this because of who you guys are." But the honorable thing is, I know one time I was walking through the lunchroom, and some of the employees stopped me and they said, "Scott, hey, we just want to let you know that we're here talking to your daughter, um, telling her that she needs to stay in college so she doesn't end up here." And I said, "Oh, you guys." I said, "If this is where she wants to be, I would be very happy for her, because what you guys do is very good, is needed, and it's excellent, and it's
Mhm.
again, it's honorable, and so it's not that you don't end up here. I hope that you choose to be here." So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me ask a kind of a companion question here. When you work with Christian business owners and the concept of stewardship comes up, and I realize it doesn't come up with every business owner that you work with. I get
right.
that. But when it does come up, how would you describe their concept of stewardship?
Their concept of stewardship.
Yeah, in other words, you're working with a Christian business owner, and the concept of stewardship comes up, and either in
Hmm.
conversation or you bring it up in directly. But when stewardship comes up, what comes back to you? How do they think about stewardship? And then
Yeah.
I got a follow on question to that,
Yeah.
but I'm interested in how do how does the common business owner think about Christian stewardship?
Yeah, the common business owner, and it's, I don't mean it in a disrespectful way. I mean it just in terms of that we they reply. Most of the ones I've talked to reply in kind of the road answer or the Sunday school answer. "Oh yeah, I'm just the steward for God's assets. This is really His company." And then, but when it comes down to it, when you see some of the behaviors, it's like, no, this is my pile,
Hmm.
um, and the Lord better not diminish it, and it's like, okay, so
And what are some of those behaviors that make you think, well, the stewardship thing's just kind of lip service on their part? Their hearts really look at it as theirs rather than something that God owns. What would be one or two of those
yeah,
things that would help you see
a
that?
couple of things is like how they set wage ranges and things like that, how they benchmark those kinds of things, what they do with the profits, perhaps even how they negotiate with God. There was one CEO who was like, "Hey, I'm volunteering and I'm tithing. How come God isn't blessing my business?" And it's like, well, I don't know. Is it your business or his business?
Yeah.
You are you bargaining? I mean, are you trying to bargain with him, or really seeking his will for what that is? And then some of it, and and I've appreciated a lot of your writings, Bill, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but sometimes it's like, well, you want growth, but is that really what God wants for your business? Um, I mean, are you actually listening to what he wants for your business, or are you to influence the industry in some way, or influence your supply chain in some way, or influence your customers in some way that doesn't necessarily require growth? One of the things I'll point out is uh, Israel wasn't the biggest nation, wasn't the biggest empire. Um, but I would imagine that Joshua and King David later on probably said, Lord, you've given us this and you have asked us to influence the nations. How about if we get to be as big as Egypt or Babylon or Rome, or, you know, and it's like, no, you're just going to be this, and that's your role.
There's an assumption in business that if you're not growing and if you're not expanding, then you're stagnating and you're dying, right?
Hmm.
And I tend to buy into that, quite frankly, just from experience, right? But there's also this notion that if I'm highly profitable, then God must be blessing me. And if I'm not highly profitable or if I'm not rich financially, then God hasn't blessed me. Int- and I just flatly disagree with. I was
Right.
having lunch yesterday up in another town with a business owner. He owns a $30 million service company. I'll just leave it at that. And he and I were talking about this very topic, Scott. And I said, I'll just call him John. I said, John, if you were to go bankrupt today, or if I was to go bankrupt today, the fact that we have wives that love us, we have great churches, we have kids that are doing well and serving the Lord, we're already rich men. We don't need money to be considered rich.
Right.
And most of the people I work with, most of my customers and partners, and that they're all far more wealthy than I am, and I'm okay with that because I have the intangibles that make life absolutely wonderful. So
Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
let me
And
go
that,
ahead.
oh, go ahead. I was going to say, and that's a great perspective. I mean, early in my career, I was part of one of the big four, big eight consult accounting companies in their consulting branch, and I was like, oh, the money's really good. And then I looked at the partners, and they were on their fourth marriages, and I was like, nope, that's not for me. I just
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
if that's what
yes.
if that's what it takes, that's nope, that's not my calling.
Yeah, and it's not God's call on anybody's life, anyways.
Yeah, and so
So
that stewardship thing, I think, is, I've experienced the growth and I've experienced the shrinkage in businesses, and it's like, Lord, it's it's your pile of money, and I'm managing it the best I can, but if you're
mhm.
choosing to share it with others, that's your choice.
Well, one of the things we do at Platinum is turnarounds. So what I have found is that most business owners know their industry well. They're pretty good at something else. I mean, they're pretty competent at something that
Hmm.
the market is willing to pay for. Um, but one skill that most don't have, whether they're Christian or not, is the ability to downsize, the ability to scale back, to go from, say, 30 million to 22 million, or to
Yeah.
go from 7 million to 4 million as a strategy to go to 10 or 12 or 15 million.
Yeah.
That most of them just don't have that.
Yeah. And that's, again, that kind of gets back to that growth mentality that if you're not growing, then you're dying. And like I think we need to be looking for those opportunities, but we also need to make sure that the core business. I know of one company that it's like every dollar that came in was spent three different ways: one to pay some past bills, one to pay some current things, and one investment in the future. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you don't have the money to really invest in the future because we're not really taking care of the current today stuff. And so, yes, growth is an awesome thing to look for, but we got to make sure that we're doing, what we need to do, block and tackle for today. So,
Yeah, you can only spend a dollar once, right?
yeah, right.
You know, I'm fond of saying money really comes into a business only, I think, either three or four ways. It's either through sales, through debt, through equity investment. And I think that's it. There's only three ways money comes into a business. I can't think of a fourth way. Um, but it can go out 10 million different ways. So,
Yeah.
well, let me shift to your let's continue on. You are a coach, and this is something that you're passionate about. So let's talk about how a Christian business owner develops her employees. And in my book, I talk about people being one of four, and that people is a section title in chapter 8 on God's four purposes for business. And I put people as one of the four purposes that God created to fulfill business. And the way I state the purpose is this way: is that business exists to help each individual develop and express their God-given creativities and passions. So let's talk about how a Christian business owner develops his or her employees, and let's start by asking the question, or looking at scriptures that come to your mind when you think about how a Christian business owner develops their employees' professional and personal skills.
Mm. A good part of it in terms of the scriptures that come to mind. Because I don't know, it's just a natural part, I guess, in terms of, I mean, there's the servant leadership, there's the discipleship that's a part of a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the scriptures, there's the teaching, um,
Mm-hmm.
and um, and I think that's just a part of it. And I will sometimes coach business owners. There's a passage that says that teachers are held to a higher standard, and it's like we are as business owners, we are the role models and we are the teachers within our organizations
Mm-hmm.
of this faith. We're as ambassadors of Christ and so on. So we're going to be held to a higher standard, and so we need to make sure that we are developing our people. And I think that's it really is a big part of it, is that you can't do it on your own. You have to bring the team up. You have to elevate their skills. We modified a performance appraisal system that was driving everyone crazy, and none of us liked doing it because it was like 30 questions. There was check boxes and there was comments that we had to fill in, and we got it reduced to essentially 5 questions. There was really only one that had to do with performance, and that was related to goals. How'd you do against your goals? But the last question we had on it was, how can I, as your supervisor manager, help you more or hinder you less?
Mm-hmm.
And and the first time we started doing that, it was like people went, "What?" Like, yeah, I need to know, how can I help you? If you haven't told me, in our frequent conversations, if you haven't told me, how can I help you more, or how can I stay out of your way, basically. Um, I know that some of my staff, we'd set some goals, and I'd say, look, I don't want to get to the end of the year and then do a review of the goals, and you go, oh yeah, I was supposed to do such and such, or I was supposed to get the level of performance to some point. So you tell me, do I need to meet with you weekly about your goals, monthly, semi-annually, so that we just touch base? What's going to be helpful to you? Because I don't need to do it for me, but what's going to be helpful for you in terms of the review? And
Hmm.
I had a staff person who said, I'd really like to just talk about this every 2 weeks so we can make adjustments or we can look at new options. And another staff person who had their goals in front of them all the time on a whiteboard was like, hey, let's just touch base once a quarter, and that should be fine. So that yeah, again, we can't do it on our own. So if we're not developing the team, if we're not creating alignment, one of the surprising things as I was thinking about this though is like the disciples that Christ brought together,
Hmm.
knowing that they were going to have to go and share and expand the faith. As he looked at that team and the different things, but there's some obvious things that you just kind of go, all right, well, this is interesting. Like Bartholomew, they believe that since his name means son of Ptolemy, that perhaps his father was Greek, his mother was Jewish, so he was
Hmm.
already kind of on the margins there. Or the fact that Matthew, who is the tax collector and is should be really used to handling and managing money, wasn't the one to carry the purse. It was Judas.
Hmm.
And it's like,
The
wait a
guy,
minute. The guy who's most qualified is not the guy you put in that position. That is just really kind of it's just kind of interesting. So
as I'm listening to you talk, I thought, it might have been a little bit of an unfair question. What scriptures come to mind when you think about how a Christian business owner develops their employees' professional and personal skills? Because then I thought, did I even have anything in my book on that? And I thought, well, surely I did. So I opened up my book while you were talking, and I'm sitting here reading through that section in chapter 8, just kind of looking at the H2 headings and the H3 headings, and I'm realizing, nope, I got nothing. I got nothing in my book that answers that question. I thought, well, how would I answer that? And I
yeah,
think where I would, I and so and then I pulled up Proverbs here, and this is just something for us to dialogue on. I'm not looking for a treaty here, but when you look at, and I'm going to scroll back up here for just a moment. When you just look at Proverbs, and and this is ambient. This is not like a direct didactical teaching that we can say, here are the 3 points of how you develop your employees. But Proverbs 1, in verse 8, it says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, do not forsake your mother's teaching. And then he goes on into some teaching, right? And then chapter 2, verse 1, my son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you. And then chapter 3, verse 1, it's the first time I'm seeing this, my son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. And so chapter 4 here, it's listen, my son, to a father's instruction, pay attention and gain understanding. And then in chapter 5, verse 1, pay attention to wisdom and turn your ears to insight. And in 6:1, my son, if you have put up security, and he already starts to, but I think what you have here, well, even in chapter 7, my son, keep my words and store up my commands within you. I think there's this over and over again, this call of a father to a son. And if we borrow from Deuteronomy that we are talking about God's law when we're sitting down, when we're rising up, when we're walking on the highway, and when we're doing all, and we're just baking God's laws and teachings into everyday life, that
hmm
becomes a model for how we develop our employees. So case in point, now I'm just thinking about this, and I'm kind of monologuing, Scott, and you're the guest and I'm the host, but I'm going to monologue just for a moment. Um, there's this idea. Well, let me see. I just sat with the leader of a nonprofit in this past week in a meeting, and he has a hard time delegating
Mm,
because if his delegates do not do a good job, then the repercussions of a job done poorly accrue back to him. And now he's
mm,
got more work to do than if he just did it himself.
mm.
And I wanted to say, and I didn't because it wasn't the right time, I wanted to say there, but that's a training issue. You've got to just kind of sit down and walk them through and say, these are things, this is kind of what I expect. This is how you would do it. And let's meet in another week or two and see how you're doing it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
one of our listeners who's watching right now says, oh, apparently this is really from a while back. It must have been stuck in the queue. So I'll come back to that at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But,
it just
well,
it
and
just seems to me that this training is more of a mentoring. At least that's how it's presented in the scriptures.
and I think, we can also take some of the things from the New Testament too, whether there's some of what Paul was telling Timothy in terms of how then to build up leaders and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think even as business owners, we are not, or managers, executives, whatever, we are not exempt from the statements that say honor one another, encourage one another, be devoted to one another, teach one another, serve one another, submit to one another, all love one another. We are still under those same commands, and so people are the important part. That was one of the things I did in an earlier book on servant leadership practice, which was basically, what does this look like on a day-to-day basis? What does encourage one another look like? How can I take someone who's struggling in their job and help them make progress on something that's going on or find improvement? And that's a whole nother thing about some motivation, the progress principle, which some research showed that. But also, how can I serve, be devoted, or love, or whatever? Can I move people to find the right job for them, that even when they're struggling in one job, but maybe they're better fit for another one? Um, these are all things, but again, the owner sometimes, I've run into several owners who are like, well, my employees serve me, not me serve them.
Ooh,
And
boy, if you have a concept of for rather than with, you're already territory.
right,
One listener is writing in on the chat line here, and they're saying that maybe encourage them to do some continuing education. Of course, you can go to community colleges, but I love companies that offer a training budget to every employee, even if it's just $500.
right.
Go do something this year that's going to improve you. Um, and um, so Scott, when you work with these Christians and you're coaching up these owners, what are one or two development methods that you recommend that they use uh, to grow their employee base, both personally or professionally?
Yeah. I will focus in on what can they do to encourage some autonomy. So give each employee some of the decision making responsibilities, whether it's in small or big ways. Encourage their input in that. I encourage them to do kind of the good coaching thing, which is ask more questions than giving advice. Uh,
Ah,
and so to sort of help draw out, I remember in one staff meeting, I asked a question and then I just sat there in silence, and everyone kept looking at me, and they were like they expected me to fill after 30 seconds of uncomfortable silence. They figured I was going to give them the answer, and then they were off the hook. And finally, one of the managers said, "I think he really wants us to answer this figure this out because he's just going to sit there in silence until we figure this out." And and I know one CEO was I was talking to, and he was like, "Oh, I wish my staff was more empowered." And I'd say, "Oh, have you stopped going to meetings? So that they have to come up with the decision. They have to come up with uh, whatever the new action, the new project, whatever it is, and a new strategy, and um, or if you do have to go to the meeting, can you sit there with your best poker face and stoic body language so that they don't have any idea what you think about an idea or whether you like it, or so don't be like, oh, raising your eyebrows in interest, or oh, sigh, oh, or
Yeah.
tapping your fingers in frustration, or whatever it is, so that they're not getting any clues about if you're for an idea or against it. Let them wrestle with it. Um,
I
because
like your
otherwise, if you don't make the, if we as owners or CEOs or whatever don't make a change, the staff is going to keep responding the same way and letting us make the decisions or whatever it is. So we got to, I don't know, I just, hey, I'll give you input, but if I really want you guys to make the decision, then you've got to make the decision.
So we're talking with Scott Ward of Forward Associates. He's a business coach. And we'll, at the end of this broadcast, we'll let you know how you can get a hold of Scott if you would like some coaching. He's also the author of a new study series called Monday Mornings. I'll just put this back up here for you again. These are books, Jesus on Monday Mornings, and these are really study guides that can be used both personally as well as in groups. So, Scott, I'm glad you're with us. I want to pick up on something that you said about when you're teaching new skills, there was an assumption that they also then got increased responsibilities. And I like that concept because if I'm going to develop my people, I just don't want them to do more. I want them to be more responsible. So part of developing our employees isn't just getting them to do a new task. It's really teaching them how to lead and how to take more responsibility. And that means that you as the owner have to resource them, maybe with a budget, maybe with the ability to make decisions.
Right.
I'll give you an example in my own business that I'm running, and then I'd like for you to comment on this. I have a gal who's had a particular title, but her fulfillment of that title has been very thin. It's a title that would be a broad title. And you would normally think this person has a lot on their plate, but the way she's done it has been like this. So I came to her about a month and a half ago and I said, "You're doing this. I need this. And probably this." And now my hands are outside the frame, but probably this in the next 6 months out of your position. You need to go from here to here. Here's the authority I'm giving you. And here's the budgets that you're now responsible for. And now you and I are going to meet weekly to see how you're doing. So it rang a bell in my head, Scott, that you alluded to that. So why don't you
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, and then some of that too is like, hey, this is the way that we know the job needs to be done today. But I also want you to explore better ways to do it.
Yeah.
We had many internal auditors. I mean, in a company of like 100 people, we had 35 people on the internal audit team, and it was
Was it that
not.
big of a company?
No, we just had people who were excited about. We had people who were excited not about doing the internal audit in the way that we typically think of it, in terms of I'm coming in and I'm going to get you, in terms of,
Oh,
oh,
okay.
you've messed up. Oh, boom. We're gonna hammer you. They didn't want to like hammer each other. We put it in the perspective of, hey, we want you, if as internal auditors, we want you to go ask, how do you do your job? What's your reference? What's the procedure? What's the policy? So on. And are you in compliance with it? And if you're not in compliance with it, why? Teach us. And, perhaps the employee has found a better way to do it, and the procedure needs to be updated, or the policy needs to
Sure.
be updated.
Sure.
And also it was a way for people to go explore other departments, like, oh, and particularly in manufacturing, it's like, oh, that engineering team never does, oh, the sales group, those guys never work. They're just always out at lunch and all this, and we're working so hard here, and whatever it is, and it's like, hey, this way they got to see what was happening in each other's departments and understand, what are some of the hassles, the headaches, the harassments that go on in those jobs, and so they had a better understanding of what was happening.
I that takes me back to my days when I was doing some green belt training in the SIPOC method, and basically you have to understand the inputs and the outputs. And if people who are doing the middle part of that don't understand the outputs of others that become their inputs and why they come to them the way they come to them, those inputs,
Right.
and then they don't understand how their output affects others in the organization. If they just kind of have this siloed view of their job, you're right. One of the development things that can really help is to help them understand the input and the output and how their work affects others and how others' work affects them.
Yeah.
Um,
I
Huge.
sat down with a group of assemblers one time who were complaining about purchasing or inventory control. We're always running out of stuff. And I said, oh, well, what happens when you guys drop some bolts on the floor? Do you pick them up and put them back in the inventory? Or you just sweep them up and toss them? Now, let's just say it's only 5 bolts a day. That's 100 or that's 25 at the end of the week, 100 at the end of the month. 6 months, now we're short 600 bolts. Inventory control thinks we're good for another 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever it is, and you guys are shut down, all
Yeah.
because they didn't know you were sweeping up 5 bolts a day and throwing them out, so and so they were like, oh, so we kind of contributed to our own problem a little bit.
Yep. A little bit. Yeah. That's really, really something. Oh my. So Scott, let's go ahead and wrap up here. I'm just going to ask you just a couple things here. First of all, when you think about your sweet spot, who's kind of the core of the onion or the core of the target for you in terms of people who can really get a lot of mileage out of your services? What are their characteristics, and talk to me about that.
Yeah, I'm really successful with people who are ready to explore some new ways to do some things, or maybe some new ways to think about it. Kind of like some of the examples I've given in this talk, in terms of how we look at not just the traditional way that we deal with a recession or a downturn, but perhaps there's a new way to do it. Perhaps there's a new way to look at how we market, or how we sell, or whatever it is. Let's explore that. But I've also realized that um, if a CEO is really comfortable with how they're operating, a business owner is really comfortable with how they're operating, and they think that you know they don't need to change, then I'm not gonna be that successful with them, because it's I've learned a lot, and I've tried to adapt and learn and change as I grow, particularly
Mhm.
as you said in the intro. I've been a follower of Christ for 40 years, and I'm still learning some things about what this means in everyday life. What does it mean to love my wife better? What does it mean to love my employees better? What does it mean? Where am I struggling with my peace? Oh, I have great peace because I have money in the bank. Well,
Yeah.
when there's no money in the bank, all right, what does that say about who is my God then? You know,
Yeah.
oh, maybe my God is fortune or money or mammon or whatever you want to call that God. But it's like, wait. So like you were saying, we can't always say, oh, God loves us because we're doing well, or God hates us because we're doing well. Christ even addresses this in terms of when he's asked about Pilate killing some people and mingling their blood in the sacrifices and stuff, and Jesus is like, wait, you think God didn't? They were worse sinners than other people in Israel, or the
Yeah.
tower that fell and killed 18 people, you think they were the worst sinners? It's like, no, that's not how life works. You can't look at your circumstances and think whether God loves you or not. And that's so I like working with people who are willing to explore some new things, have made some changes, want to make some more changes, and not just think they need to change. I don't need to change, because one of the things I've learned is that they won't change until I change. If I don't trust
Yeah.
them, if I don't trust them, then they're not going to trust me. If I don't give them some, um, if I don't serve them, then they're not going to really serve the company. Um,
Yeah. It takes a certain amount of humility as a business owner to admit that you need to change, and a certain amount of, how do I say this? You're settled in the Lord to encourage your employees to change, because they may change in ways that means that they need to leave your business and move on in their career.
yeah,
And if it's all about you, you're going to want to keep people around you who are doing good because it's about you. But if you're really pro employee, you want them to develop and be the best that they can be and be all that God has called them to be. And so you hold your top talent with an open hand before the Lord, and you say, God, anytime you want this talent, take it.
yeah,
And I know that you'll supply me with the other talent is exactly what I need. So yeah.
yeah. Forward Steel was set up exactly that way. It was to give people some second chances and to give them some employment history so they could move on to perhaps a job that they enjoyed more. We brought in a couple of Iraqi refugees. One guy
Hmm.
had been a welder, and so we brought him in as a welder. But knowing that this may not be the thing that he wanted. But another guy was a database engineer, but he had learned to drive forklift and bend metal while he was in a refugee camp in Turkey. And so I'm like, Omar, come work with me, and and then he's like, he was kind of enjoying it, and so he's like, do you want to learn to weld? So we taught him how to weld, and then I said, well, now that you know how to weld, how about if I'd like a stand to hold this stretch wrap roll, and so you design it and build it and weld it and all this other kind of stuff, and if you need help, ask this guy or ask this guy or whatever, and get the help you need. But otherwise, start utilizing your new skills. Well, I wasn't expecting to hang on to him forever. He eventually got work in his chosen field, his first field. But it's like, hey, while we have you, let's teach you some things that maybe
Yeah.
you can use later on. So,
And then he came over to your house and did some welding, right? No, I'm kidding. So, well, listen, how can people get a hold of you, Scott? How should they get a hold of you? And while you're talking about that, I'm just going to put your books back up here again. So tell us how we can get a hold
yeah.
of you.
Well, they can Forward Associates, and that's the number 4 Ward Associates.com is the company website, and I'm at scott.ward at Forward Associates. So again, that's the number 4 Ward Associates.com. That's probably the best way, or try and look me up on LinkedIn. I do respond to messages there too. And yeah, and again, it's just I've been blessed in terms of career, and for a while I would do what I called coffee cup consulting. It's hey,
Yeah.
let's have a cup of coffee, and I'll give you some. I may give you some ideas or ask you some questions, and that may be all it's worth is that $2 for the cup of coffee. So, but
Yeah. There's a lot of pay it forward in the consulting business. And
yeah,
I was the gentleman I was with yesterday that I mentioned. I reminded him that I am a consultant in some of my roles. One role I run a business, but another role I consult. And I say, I'm always with two things. I'm a consultant. You're the owner. I make recommendations. You make decisions. And then the other thing I said is I'm always within 15 minutes of being fired. So I get it. I get my role.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
well,
and
Scott,
I'm sure it happens to you too, Bill, where sometimes you say something and you go, "Oh, I should listen to that advice for my own company."
I know. I should pay attention to myself more often.
Right.
Oh, geez. Well, Scott, thanks for joining me this morning. It's been a delight to speak with you, and really just appreciate you being here today.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Bill, and I appreciate your work in terms of the Bible and business. I gained a lot from your Christian Theology of Business book, and then I like your series about the 8 A's, and that I think that's maybe one of your latest ones. But the things that can kill a business or kill our ambassadorship, I guess, in some ways in terms of business. So appreciate
Yeah,
your
I
effort
did.
too. I learned from it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I I appreciate that. And from what he's referring to is part of a chapter on partnerships in the theology book, and also I did a whole playlist on this YouTube channel, Bible and Business YouTube channel, on the 10 A's that build healthy partnership, and the 10 C's that build healthy partnerships, and the 10 A's or the 8 A's that kill healthy partnerships. So you might just want to take a look at that. Well, I'm Bill English, the publisher here at Bible and Business. I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been a delight. And we will have another profile in stewardship as soon as I can get it lined up. It'll probably be in 2 weeks. And until then, I hope you go out and make it a great day. Take care. Thanks for joining us.
Peace.